Ex-convict saved a cop from trouble. The next day, he didn't pretend to forget. The gun was pointed at Officer Derek Mitchell's head, and the three men surrounding him in that dark alley didn't look like they planned to let him walk away. But what really made Derek's blood run cold wasn't the weapon. It was recognizing the tattooed face of the man holding it, someone he'd arrested 5 years ago. "Remember me, officer?" The gunman sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. What happened next would haunt Derek for reasons he never expected. "Put the gun down." The voice came from the alley's entrance, calm and unervingly steady. All heads turned to see a tall figure stepping into the dim streetlight, hands visible, non-threatening, but carrying an authority that made even armed men hesitate. Marcus Chun, 34 years old, had walked this neighborhood for 2 years since his release from prison. He knew every corner, every shadow, every dangerous situation before it exploded. And right now, he was watching a cop about to die in the same alley where Marcus himself had been arrested 7 years ago by this very same officer. "This doesn't concern you," the gunman snapped, but his voice wavered slightly. Marcus took another step forward. "Tommy Rodriguez. Your sister Maria asked me to check on you last week at the community center. Said you were getting into trouble again." His eyes never left Tommy's. "She's going to be real disappointed when she visits you in prison. Again." The mention of his sister made Tommy's hand shake. In that split second of distraction, Marcus moved with a speed that came from years of surviving places where hesitation meant death. The gun clattered to the ground, Tommy was against the wall, and his two friends scattered into the darkness like roaches when the lights come on. Derek stood there, gasping, his service weapon still holstered because everything had happened too fast. He stared at Marcus, recognition slowly dawning on his face. "I know you," Derek whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yeah," Marcus replied, keeping Tommy pinned while pulling out his phone to call 911. "You arrested me 7 years ago. Possession with intent to distribute. I served 5 years in Riverstone State." The silence between them was deafening as sirens approached in the distance. Derek had arrested hundreds of people in his 15-year career. He barely remembered most of their faces. But Marcus remembered everything about that night. How Derek had been the only cop who hadn't thrown him against the car, who'd actually listened when Marcus begged him to tell his mother where he was going. Small mercies from a man just doing his job. But in that moment 7 years ago, it had meant something to a scared 27-year-old who knew his life was about to fall apart. When backup arrived, the scene was surreal. Officers surrounded them, confused about who the victim was and who the threat had been. Tommy was arrested, and Marcus gave his statement with the practiced calm of someone who'd been through this process before, though this time from the other side. "Why'd you help me?" Derek asked as other officers finished their paperwork. His hands were still trembling slightly, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. "After what I did to you." Marcus looked at him with an expression Derek couldn't quite read. "You did your job. I broke the law. That's not complicated." He paused, something flickering in his eyes. But what happens next might be. Before Derek could ask what he meant, Marcus walked away into the night, leaving the officer with a dozen questions and a growing sense that this encounter was far from over. What Derek didn't know as he drove home that night, still shaken, was that Marcus Chun wasn't just some reformed ex-con trying to do good. He was a man who'd spent 2 years carefully rebuilding his life, working 3 jobs, volunteering at the community center, and slowly, methodically documenting something that would change everything. And what Marcus didn't know was that saving Officer Derek Mitchell's life had just set in motion a chain of events that would force both men to confront truths neither was ready to face. If you're enjoying this story of second chances and unexpected consequences, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about justice and redemption. The next morning, Derek showed up at Marcus's workplace unannounced. Marcus was restocking shelves at Henderson's hardware store when he spotted the uniform. His hands stilled for just a moment, old instincts kicking in, that learned wariness of blue that never quite left, no matter how clean you lived. But Derek wasn't there with handcuffs this time. "We need to talk," Derek said quietly, glancing around at the other customers. "Not here. Maybe grab coffee after your shift." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "My shift ends at 3. Rosie's Diner, 2 blocks east." He turned back to his work, dismissing the cop as casually as one might dismiss a casual acquaintance. But his jaw was tight, his movements careful and controlled. What Derek couldn't see was the calculation happening behind Marcus's eyes, the rapid assessment of whether this meeting was opportunity or threat. At 3:15, they sat across from each other in a worn booth, 2 cups of terrible coffee between them. Derek looked different out of the context of the alley, older, tired, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept well. "I need to thank you properly," Derek began, but Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "You already did. We're even." Marcus's tone was polite but final, like closing a door. "Even." Derek's laugh was bitter. "You saved my life. I put you in prison for 5 years. That math doesn't work out." Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee. "You were doing your job. I was selling drugs in a neighborhood where kids play. I deserved what I got." The words were true, but something in his delivery felt rehearsed, like a line he'd practiced until he believed it himself. Derek leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, I've been a cop for 15 years. I've seen a lot of guys come out of Riverstone. Most of them are back inside within a year. But you..." He shook his head. 3 jobs, volunteering at the community center, clean record. You're actually making it work." "Is there a question in there, Officer Mitchell?" Marcus asked, his face carefully neutral. "How'd you know Tommy Rodriguez would listen to you? How'd you know mentioning his sister would make him hesitate?" For the first time, something flickered in Marcus's expression, a hint of satisfaction quickly masked. "I volunteer at the East Side Community Center. Tommy's sister brings her kids there for after-school programs. I know a lot of people in this neighborhood, officer. It's a small world when you actually pay attention to it." The emphasis on those last words landed like a quiet accusation. Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I want to help you. You saved my life. Let me return the favor. I've got connections, I could help you get a better job, maybe." "I don't need your help." Marcus's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath now. "I've got 3 jobs because that's what it takes when you have a felony record. Henderson hired me when 20 other places wouldn't even interview me. I stock shelves at night at Sullivan's Grocery. And I do IT support remotely for a tech company that doesn't ask about backgrounds." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm doing just fine, officer." "Derek. Call me Derek." "I prefer to keep things professional, Officer Mitchell." The distance Marcus maintained was deliberate, almost architectural, like he built walls and didn't plan to take them down for anyone, especially not for cops offering guilt-motivated favors. Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "I have to go. Duty calls." He stood, then hesitated. "Marcus, if you ever need anything." "I know where to find you," Marcus interrupted, his tone making it clear he never would. After Derek left, Marcus sat alone for several minutes, staring at his coffee. Then he pulled out his phone and opened a folder he'd been maintaining for 18 months. Inside were dozens of photos, carefully documented conversations, screenshots of public records, and a growing timeline that told a story Officer Derek Mitchell didn't even know existed. A story about 7 years ago, when a young cop had arrested Marcus Chun for possession with intent to distribute. When the evidence had been found in Marcus's car after a routine traffic stop in a neighborhood where Marcus had been visiting his dying grandmother. When Marcus's lawyer had been overworked and underpaid. When the public defender had advised him to take a plea deal rather than risk a trial. When Marcus had been innocent. What Derek didn't know as he drove back to the station was that Marcus had spent 5 years in prison learning, planning, and preparing. He'd studied law in the prison library. He'd made connections with other inmates who'd been wrongfully convicted. He'd tracked every case Officer Derek Mitchell had worked on since that night, building a pattern that even Derek himself hadn't noticed. And what Derek especially didn't know was that saving the cop's life hadn't been chance. Marcus had been following Derek for 3 months, watching, waiting for the right moment. Not to hurt him, but to create a debt. To establish credibility. To position himself as the hero in a story where he'd been the victim for far too long. Because Marcus Chun wasn't just some reformed ex-con trying to rebuild his life. He was a man on a mission, and Officer Derek Mitchell had just become an unwitting participant in something much bigger than a simple alley rescue. The question wasn't whether Marcus would collect on the debt Derek owed him. The question was whether Derek would survive the payment when it finally came due. 3 weeks passed before Derek saw Marcus again, But this time it wasn't by accident. Derek was leaving the station after a double shift when he noticed Marcus standing across the street, hands in his pockets, waiting. Not hiding, not lurking, just standing there in plain sight, like he had every right to be there. Which, technically, he did. But something about his presence made Derek's instincts fire warnings he couldn't quite name. "We need to talk," Marcus said when Derek approached. "Somewhere private." They ended up in Derek's car, parked in an empty lot by the old railroad tracks. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that made everything feel like a noir film. Marcus pulled out a tablet from his backpack and handed it to Derek without a word. "What is this?" Derek asked, but he was already scrolling through the files. Police reports, arrest records, court documents, and photos, dozens of photos showing patterns, timestamps, locations. "That's your arrest record for the past 7 years, Marcus said quietly. "Specifically, your drug-related arrests in the East Side neighborhood." Derek's stomach tightened. "I don't understand. Why do you have this?" "Because I wanted to know if what happened to me was an isolated incident or part of something bigger." Marcus leaned back, his voice steady and controlled. "Turns out, it was bigger. Much bigger." The tablet showed a map of the East Side neighborhood with pins marking every arrest Derek had made. The pattern was unmistakable, clusters around specific corners, specific times, specific demographics. Young men of color, ages 18 to 35, mostly first-time offenders who took plea deals rather than fight cases they couldn't afford to challenge. "You arrested 43 people in 7 years for possession with intent to distribute," Marcus continued. 38 of them were in the East Side. 31 were people of color. 27 took plea deals. And every single arrest happened after routine traffic stops or suspicious behavior that gave you probable cause to search. Derek's hands were shaking now. "I was doing my job. Those were legitimate arrests." "Were they?" Marcus's voice remained calm, almost gentle, which made his words cut deeper. "Because I spent 2 years tracking down 12 of those people. 7 of them swear they never had drugs in their cars before you searched them. 4 have alibis that were never properly investigated. And 3 of them, including me, were visiting sick relatives in the neighborhood when you pulled them over." The silence in the car was suffocating. "You're saying I planted evidence?" Derek's voice cracked. "I'm saying someone did. Question is, was it you, or were you being used by someone else?" Derek's mind raced through 7 years of arrests, commendations, partnerships. His training officer had been Sergeant Frank Morrison, a 30-year veteran who taught him everything about working the streets. Frank, who always seemed to know exactly where to find the dealers. Frank, who'd retired with full honors 2 years ago and now lived in a house way too nice for a cop's pension. "Frank," Derek whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Marcus nodded slowly. "Your old training officer. The one who was always first on scene for your biggest busts. The one who somehow always knew exactly where to tell you to look." He pulled out another file. "I found 6 other officers he trained over the years. Same pattern. Lots of arrests, lots of convictions, lots of careers built on drug busts that were just a little too convenient." "Why are you telling me this?" Derek asked, his voice hollow. "Why not just go to internal affairs?" "Because I won't listen to an ex-con with a grudge." Marcus's expression hardened. "But they might listen to a decorated officer who saved lives, who has a spotless record, who suddenly realizes he was manipulated into destroying innocent people's lives." Derek looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written in every line of Marcus's face. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Cold, calculated, undeniable justice. "What do you want from me?" Derek asked. "I want you to help me prove it. I want you to wear a wire and talk to Frank. I want you to ask the questions that an ex-con can't ask. I want you to be the hero you think you are instead of the weapon someone else used to hurt people like me." Marcus pulled out a business card, not his own, but one belonging to Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chun, no relation, though the shared last name felt like cosmic irony. "She's been investigating corruption in the department for 6 months. She's got pieces of the puzzle, but she needs someone on the inside willing to talk. Someone credible. Someone who was there." Marcus met Derek's eyes. Someone who owes a debt he can never fully repay. The weight of those words settled over Derek like a shroud. He'd spent 3 weeks being grateful that Marcus had saved his life. Now he understood that the rescue in the alley wasn't the beginning of their story, it was the middle. And the real debt had been incurred 7 years ago when Derek had arrested an innocent man and never looked back to see what happened to him. "If I do this," Derek said slowly, "Frank goes to prison. My entire career gets scrutinized. Every arrest I ever made gets questioned. My reputation is built on lies," Marcus finished quietly. "The question isn't what you'll lose, Officer Mitchell. The question is whether you're brave enough to do what's right when it costs you everything." Derek sat in the darkness of his car, holding a tablet full of evidence that would destroy his world, offered by a man he'd wrongly imprisoned. The irony wasn't lost on him. Neither was the justice of it. "When do we start?" Derek finally asked. Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile, not of triumph, but of grim satisfaction. "We already have. I've been recording this conversation. With your permission, of course." He nodded to the phone sitting between them, red light glowing. Derek should have been angry. Should have felt betrayed. Instead, he felt something like relief. Because for the first time in 7 years, he was on the right side of the truth. "Tomorrow," Marcus said, gathering his materials. "Meet me at ADA Chen's office at 9. Bring every piece of documentation you have on your arrests. And Officer Mitchell." He paused at the car door. "Thank you for finally choosing to see what you should have seen 7 years ago." After Marcus left, Derek sat alone in his car, watching the last light fade from the sky. He thought about all the lives he'd unknowingly helped destroy. All the families torn apart. All the futures stolen by a corrupt system he'd been too naive, too trusting, or too willfully blind to question. The debt he owed Marcus Chun wasn't for saving his life in an alley. It was for opening his eyes to the damage he'd done while believing he was one of the good guys. And tomorrow, the debt would start coming due in ways that would either redeem him or destroy him completely. The meeting with ADA Sarah Chun lasted 4 hours. By the end, Derek's entire understanding of his career lay in ruins around him. "We've been building this case for 8 months, Sarah explained, spreading files across her conference table. Frank Morrison ran a protection racket disguised as police work. He'd tip off dealers about raids in exchange for cash, then set up his trainee officers to arrest decoys, innocent people in the wrong place at the wrong time. The real dealers stayed free, Frank got paid, and young cops like you built impressive arrest records on the backs of innocent people." Derek stared at the evidence. Bank records showing deposits to Frank's account matching dates of major arrests, testimony from 3 dealers who'd flipped, surveillance photos of Frank meeting with known distributors. The web was vast, intricate, and Derek had been trapped in it for 7 years without even knowing. "How many?" Derek asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How many innocent people did I arrest?" 12 that we can prove," Marcus said from his position by the window. "Probably more that we'll never know about." The number hit Derek like a physical blow. 12 lives destroyed. 12 families torn apart. 12 people who'd screamed their innocence while Derek had written his reports and collected his commendations. "I need you to wear a wire and meet with Frank," Sarah said. "He trusts you. He thinks you're still his loyal protege. We need him to admit what he did, on tape, with corroboration we can use in court." Derek nodded, numb. "When?" "Tonight. He's been calling you, hasn't he? Wanting to meet up, reminisce about old times." It was true. Frank had reached out twice since the alley incident, suggesting they grab beers and catch up. Derek had been avoiding him, some unconscious part of his brain already sensing the rot he hadn't yet been willing to acknowledge. "I'll do it," Derek said. Then he looked at Marcus. "But I want something in return. I want my arrest of Marcus Chin expunged. I want his record cleared. And I want compensation for the 5 years he lost." Sarah nodded. "Already in the works. Once Frank goes down, we're filing motions to vacate every conviction connected to his arrests. Marcus will be exonerated." "Not good enough," Derek pressed. "I want it in writing before I do this. Marcus gets cleared first, then I help you take down Frank. That's the deal." For the first time, Marcus looked surprised. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Derek interrupted. "I took 5 years of your life. The least I can do is give them back before I risk mine. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. After a long moment, Sarah pulled out her laptop. I'll draft the agreement now. Judge Martinez owes me a favor. I can have Marcus's conviction vacated by 5 o'clock today. By 6 p.m., Marcus Chun walked out of the courthouse a free man, not just released, but exonerated. The arrest was wiped from his record as if it had never happened. 7 years of carrying that weight, and in a single afternoon, it was gone. At 7 p.m., Derek sat in a bar downtown wearing a wire, waiting for Frank Morrison to arrive. His hands were steady now. He'd made his choice. Frank showed up 20 minutes late, all smiles and back slaps, ordering whiskey like it was a celebration. Good to see you, kid. Heard about that mess in the alley. Can't believe some ex-con played hero. Yeah, Derek said carefully. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. The guy who saved me, Marcus Chun. I arrested him 7 years ago. Remember? Frank's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Can't say I do. We busted a lot of dealers back then. East Side neighborhood. Routine traffic stop. You called it in, told me exactly where to search his car. Found 2 kilos of cocaine in the trunk. Sounds about right. Frank took a long drink. What about it? He says he was innocent. Says he never had drugs in his car. Frank laughed, but it sounded forced. They all say that, Derek. You know how it works. Do I? Derek leaned forward. Because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Thinking about how many arrests we made together. How you always knew exactly where to look. How the evidence was always exactly where you said it would be. The smile vanished from Frank's face. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to know the truth. Did we arrest guilty people, or did you set them up? Frank stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're wearing a wire. It wasn't a question. 20 years on the force had given Frank instincts Derek couldn't hide from. In that moment, everything hung in the balance. Frank could run, fight, or break. Instead, he laughed. A bitter, defeated sound that confirmed everything. You self-righteous idiot, Frank said, sitting back down heavily. You think you're a hero now? You think clearing your conscience makes you better than me? He leaned close, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Every commendation you got, every promotion, every time someone called you a good cop, that was built on my work. You were nothing without me. Then tell me how it worked, Derek said. Tell me what you did. And Frank did. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was rage, maybe it was the whiskey, but he talked. About the dealers who paid him to stay free. About planting evidence on innocent people to maintain his arrest statistics. About training young cops like Derek to be his unwitting weapons. About the 12 lives destroyed, the families ruined, the system corrupted from the inside. By the time Frank finished, he was almost crying, not from remorse, but from fury at being caught. You're done, Frank, Derek said quietly. It's over. Police flooded the bar within minutes. Frank Morrison was arrested on 17 counts of evidence tampering, corruption, and conspiracy. He didn't resist. Just stared at Derek with pure hatred as they led him away in handcuffs. Outside, Marcus stood with Sarah Chun, watching through the window as Derek gave his statement to Internal Affairs. He did it, Marcus said, something like wonder in his voice. He actually chose the truth over his career. Some people surprise you, Sarah replied. And sometimes, giving someone a chance to do the right thing is the best revenge of all. 6 months later, Marcus Chun stood in front of the East Side Community Center, watching workers install a new sign, the Second Chance Foundation, Marcus Chun, Executive Director. The compensation from his wrongful conviction lawsuit had been substantial, not enough to give back 5 years of his life, but enough to build something meaningful from the ashes. He'd used every dollar to create a legal aid organization helping other wrongfully convicted individuals navigate the nightmare he'd survived. Derek Mitchell was there too, though not in uniform. He'd resigned from the police force 3 weeks after Frank's arrest. The department had offered to keep him on, even praised him for his courage in exposing corruption. But Derek couldn't wear the badge anymore. Not after understanding how much damage he'd done while believing he was serving justice. You didn't have to come, Marcus said as Derek approached. Yes, I did. Derek handed him a folder. These are the last 3 cases I helped Saracen close. All officers trained by Frank. All following his playbook. 26 more people getting their convictions overturned. Marcus took the folder, something softening in his expression. Over the past 6 months, an unlikely partnership had formed between them. Derek had become the Foundation's primary investigator, using his knowledge of police procedure to identify other corruption cases. He worked for minimum wage and spent his evenings teaching criminal justice classes, warning young cops about the dangers of blind loyalty and misplaced trust. Frank's sentencing is tomorrow, Derek said quietly. 15 to 25 years. Federal prison. Good. Marcus's voice held no satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. He deserves every day of it. They stood in silence, watching families enter the community center, some coming for legal help, others for the job training programs Marcus had established, still others just for a safe place where ex-cons could rebuild their lives without judgment. I got something in the mail yesterday, Derek said, pulling out an envelope. My old partner, Rodriguez, sent it. He's writing a book about the case. Wants to interview both of us. You going to do it? Derek shrugged. I figure someone should tell the truth about what happens when good intentions meet corrupt systems. Maybe it'll help some other cop recognize the warning signs before they destroy innocent lives. He paused. What about you? I'll do it, Marcus said. Not for revenge. Not anymore. But because 12 people had their lives stolen, and they deserve to have their stories told. It was the closest thing to forgiveness Derek would ever get from Marcus, and he knew it. They would never be friends, the debt was too large, the wound too deep. But they had become something else, 2 men bound by the understanding that justice isn't about punishment or redemption. It's about truth, accountability, and the hard work of making things right when everything's been wrong. Thank you, Derek said suddenly, for giving me the chance to fix this. You could have destroyed me. Could have exposed me as just another corrupt cop. But you gave me the opportunity to choose differently. Marcus met his eyes. I didn't do it for you. I did it because 12 people deserved better than revenge. They deserved justice. And sometimes, justice requires using the very system that broke you to fix what's broken. A young woman approached them, Carmen Rodriguez, Tommy's sister, whose mention in that alley had started everything. She now worked as the Foundation's intake coordinator, helping ex-cons navigate re-entry into society. Marcus, we have 6 new cases this week, she said, handing him a stack of files. All from Frank Morrison arrests. Saracen thinks we can clear at least 4 of them. Marcus took the files, and Derek saw something he'd never seen before in the man's face. Hope. Not naive optimism, but the hard-earned hope of someone who'd survived hell and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes. As Derek walked away from the community center that afternoon, he thought about the man he'd been 7 years ago, confident, ambitious, certain he was one of the good guys. And he thought about who he'd become, humbler, wiser, forever marked by the knowledge that good intentions mean nothing without accountability. Frank Morrison would spend the next 2 decades in prison, the same system he'd corrupted now consuming him. Derek had lost his career, his reputation, his certainty about who he was. But Marcus Chun had gotten something back that money couldn't buy, his name cleared, his truth acknowledged, and the satisfaction of watching justice prevail not through violence or revenge, but through patience, evidence, and the courage to make his oppressor into his unwitting ally. The best revenge, Marcus had learned, wasn't destroying the person who hurt you. It was forcing them to become the instrument of their own downfall while you built something better from the rubble of what they destroyed. He tried to bury Marcus Chun with a false conviction, but Marcus turned that grave into a foundation and built an empire of justice on top of it. Some people seek revenge. Others architect redemption. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is give your enemy the chance to save themselves by telling the truth. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more true accounts of justice that prove the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't anger. It's the patient, meticulous pursuit of truth, no matter how long it takes or what it costs.